Okay, hello and welcome everybody. My name is Clare Farrell. I am a co-founder of Extinction Rebellion here in the UK, and I'm working with the media team at the moment. And this is going to be a video conversation between two special guests who are here to talk on some very important topics, in my opinion, how we are thinking at the moment around collapse and how we are thinking around hope. And it's great that we've been joined by Caroline Hickman, who's here from the Climate Psychology Alliance, and Naresh Giangrande, who is a co-founder of the Transition Towns movement and has been working extensively with Jem Bendel on the Deep Adaptation project. I'll just say as an introduction to why we're having this conversation right now, that I think the shifting narrative at the moment around climate change, biodiversity loss, extinction crisis, and our sort of intersecting planetary crises and emergency that we're in, it feels to me as been sort of moving around in some very, very interesting ways, with all different people and different actors and different bodies bringing forward different elements of this narrative of our times. And it's interesting that I think we saw the Extinction Rebellion movement appear on the scene in 2018, and for a large part of last year, seeing that window shift, that Overton window shift on what we're thinking is possible, what we're considering to be a real possibility, and how we're thinking about the risk that humanity might be in. And at the beginning of 2020, it certainly felt like things were potentially starting to move around in some quite unexpected ways. So I'm just going to mostly be quiet in this session, hopefully, and let Caroline and Naresh have this conversation. So I guess I'll just start you off both with an opening question, really, which is how do you see the narrative that's moving around right at this moment, as we're just about to go into the 2020 September rebellion?
Well, can I start? Caroline,
Sure.
you want to? Yeah.
No,
What I'm interested in is about hope and questions about collapse, and those are two difficult questions, I think, because we're looking ahead in the future, and something which I'm working on at the moment is something called contemplative activism, and it's about being in the present and being in the here and now. And in the here and now, I think it's important for all of us to live our lives as fully and as completely and as joyfully as possible. And that's what I'm really, truly interested. Having said that, of course, we all look ahead, and our society has this narrative about hope and about progress, and about how life is supposed to get better, and hopefully for more and more people over time. And I think we've lost that narrative. I think that narrative left us some time ago, way before Extinction Rebellion. And I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing a societal collapse. And that's the first thing I want to put that marker on the table, is that we are in the collapse. This is not, we are living in the collapse. This is, in Extinction Rebellion's terms, show me what collapse looks like. This is what collapse looks like. And this is what we're seeing. And I think we are going to see multiple systems of ours start to create these discontinuities. And I think this virus has created a circumstance in which we are living in an unexpected and severe discontinuity in terms of our political, social, economic systems. And that is going to be, I think that is going to continue. And it's not to say collapse won't get worse. It might get extremely painful and difficult for many of us, but I think this is what we are going to see if you define collapse as the sort of discontinuity in our in our systems of life. And in terms of hope, if I can continue, I'll just finish with this and hand over to Caroline. And in terms of hope, I'm always kind of curious about, well, what are people hoping for? Are they hoping for life to continue as it has done, with all the difficulties and contradictions, and you know, there's this vast number of really gnarly problems that are facing us, are hitting us in the face day by day. And surely what that says to me is that things need to change really substantially and really quickly. And that's something that we're not very good at. Hope, are we hoping for things to remain the same? Well, I think you're going to be really disappointed if that's what you're hoping for. But to hope that we can meet this crisis and do it in a way that is full of life and love and rage and all those things, is that's certainly the possibilities. And we have the chance to fully engage and come out the other side of our current set of crises as a species. We have that capacity. Whether we will take it or not is I think still a really open question that I sit with every day.
Thank you, Naresh. Hard to know where to start. So much to pick up on what you've just said. So I'm going to try and pick up on a couple of things, and hopefully come back to some of the others as we go on. I think you've summarized it beautifully. So a number of things come to mind as I listen to you. One is the narrative of getting beyond COVID that's around at the moment, which is very popular when we get a vaccination, when we get beyond COVID, when we can get back to normal. So there is this seeded idea of normality being somewhere in the future where we can live life as we did before. That worries me, partly because I think it suggests we're not learning the lessons of COVID about why it's here in the first place. And it also worries me because of the way it has dominated the narrative shift away from an acceptance and an adjustment that's needed to the new reality that we're engaging with. And that, I think, in turn has a huge impact on the way emotionally and psychologically we engage with the climate and biodiversity crisis. Because the climate and biodiversity crisis is not something we're ever going to get beyond. So we have to think about these things rather differently. And I think it's fascinating and worrying and frightening time to be having this conversation, because in the last few weeks, we've had the hottest day ever on record. We've got ice shelf collapse. So when we talk about collapse, yes, I agree with you, Naresh, there is social collapse, but there's also environmental collapse. And the social collapse, certainly for some people, is not debatable, but other people may be able to debate that. But we can't debate the collapse of the environment that we've been depending on and trusting would be there in the long term for a long time. We also had news this week about the potential collapse of the harvests. So we've got collapse both socially and personally to consider. And certainly a lot of the people I've been talking with as a psychotherapist are feeling themselves to be in a state of emotional and psychological and intellectual collapse because old certainties are being ripped up. So they're feeling more and more and more anxious. So we've got the personal, we've got the social, but we've also got the global, and we've got the environmental, but we've also got the kind of socio-political collapse where the social contract is collapsing all around us, where we've got young men taking it upon themselves to go and shoot people on the streets as a inverse, perverse way of keeping law and order. Well, for me, that's a collapse of rationality and a collapse of sanity and a collapse of trust in others to help us navigate our way through this. So I think there's lots of collapses that we can talk about. And certainly one of them, I think, is this collapse of trust and belief and faith that governments will save us and that technology will save us, and even that scientists will save us, because a lot of scientists themselves are feeling highly frustrated with the fact that they've been repeatedly warning of some of these worsening environmental situations and increased warming and not being listened to. So I've been talking with a group of climate scientists recently, and what's absolutely striking for me is the language they're using is that exactly the same language as the youth climate strikers, who I'm also been talking with. So we've got this extraordinary parallel where I'm hearing youth activists use the same language as older white male scientists who we might perceive as powerful figures, who themselves don't feel powerful at the moment. They feel powerless and undermined. So there's a collapse in the faith and in the belief and in the trust of all of these old narratives going on all simultaneously. And our old normalities are being ripped up. They're being taken away. They're being taken apart. And what does that mean is people will then have to imagine themselves into alternative futures. And what that risks is that people will imagine apocalyptic futures as well as imagine Edenic fantasy futures where everything will be all right. And the risk is that people will kind of bounce between the two. And for me, I think that's part of the understanding about why people kind of bounce backwards and forwards between kind of naive optimism and hope and saying, no, we've got to have hope, otherwise I wouldn't be able to function, versus the kind of doom-mongering nihilistic despair, both of which are false narratives, really. It's a false dichotomy. It's a false relationship. They're both extreme opposite ends of something. So emotionally, psychologically, what's absolutely crucial for me at the moment is to hold the tension between these things and to engage relationally with what's going on. And earlier, Naresh, as we were kind of sort of starting to begin this conversation, you asked an extraordinary question, which I thought was fantastic, which is, where's this coming from? And why now? Why is this appearing now? Because I honestly think a lot of this has been around for a long time. It's been around for years. I've been having these conversations for some time. But what I've noticed that's slightly different is these conversations are now on the surface. And I don't think they were on the surface, and I don't think they were quite as collective before. And maybe there wasn't the sense of urgency, but there is an increased sense of urgency and panic and distress, I think, that accompanies this now, because we've no longer got the time to continue to talk about this intellectually. We've got to somehow manage the need for urgent action alongside extraordinarily complex emotional responses to this. I'm going to stop because I talked a bit and see if that sparked anything for you, Naresh.
Well, yeah, Caroline, gosh, so much in what you've said. Gosh, where to start? It's certainly in the transition town movement, we noticed quite early on. I mean, we were people who were engaging with the idea that we were facing some kind of discontinuity in our social, economic, political systems. From some time ago, we started in about 2005, so the last 15 years, I've been operating in this space. And something we noticed early on, because part of the transition town movement was people who were versed in psychology and the whole process of change, noticing that this false narrative that you talked about, either between naive optimism and utter despair at collapse, was something that very early on was clear that that was the kind of, those were the parameters of the social conversation, and it was very hard to get beyond that for many people. And we talked about society being an addict, and that how we're addicted to this high consumption lifestyle. And the two positions of the addict are this kind of, oh, it'll go on forever. I can have this whenever, as long as I want it, and even more and give me more every year. And then the other side to say, well, it's not going to happen anymore. Then if I can't have my addiction, then the only thing left to me is suicide, is complete despair and collapse. My whole world is gone. It's gone. And but what's interesting to notice is that there are positions beyond that, like I totally agree with you. It takes a degree of emotional maturity and ability to engage with this on an emotional level. That is, I think, is one of the most important skills to have in these times, is to be able to then realize, is to be able to let go of the, these old certainties, like you said, which is another, I think that's a really brilliant phrase, the old certainties, and embrace the world that is already here and is gaining momentum. And once you do that, then there's a sense of loss at letting go of that old narrative, but then there's also a new sense of purpose, a new sense of possibility. And I think that's something that XR has been very good at formulating that narrative and saying, look, this is not about, oh, it's despair, there's nothing we can do, we're just going to, hide ourselves under the duvet and never come out again until it's over. This is a time to become truly engaged and truly alive. And if you do that, there's all sorts of possibilities, and indeed we're seeing that, and in so many areas of life. I've been working on a project at the moment as part of one of my side projects of looking at how we can build houses and regenerative communities. And it's if I wasn't working on that, I wouldn't see the amount of innovation that is going on, that is taking everything from cryptocurrencies to new ways of building modern manufacturing methods, to information technology, to new use of materials, to creating insulation from fungi. I mean, the most extraordinary things that are, you think, oh, this is science fiction. No, it isn't. It's real. It's happening now. These people are innovating at an extraordinary pace, and that's something that gives me hope. That this incredible ability we have as a species to create new possibilities and to create new futures. And again, that I get back to that place that if it's about holding on to what we have, which I'm afraid a lot of people are stuck in, and not allowing ourselves to move beyond that and see the extraordinary possibilities that we have, and the extraordinary possibilities that are being embraced by many, many people, then that's not a recipe for hope in my world. But there is a lot of possibility, and if I can just say one more thing, Caroline, I'll hand it over. It's that question of power. I think there's a sense of powerfulness, and where do I have agency? Where do I have power in my world? And can I, if power derives from this sense of control, and I'm in control, therefore I feel powerful. Again, I think that's one of those old narratives. That's the old command and control. We talked about, it's kind of ironic that capitalists accused the communist world of this kind of command and control economy. Well, there was a lot of that in the sort of the whole factory structure and the manufacturing, the old manufacturing ways. And now that narrative is being broken down, and we are facing a world where we're not in control. And not only that, that's one of the, I think, psychological shifts that we are making, and that's important to make, is the sense of how to feel powerful but not in control, and how to feel that you have agency and you can act in a world that is where change is accelerating, where the old narrative that we are in control is again, it's one of those false narratives that we never were in control. It was just an illusion that we managed to create for ourselves for a time anyway, and so to act from a place of not being in control, to act from a place of being in the present moment and accepting what is for me one of those really big shifts that we are making, or some of us are making, but hopefully more of us can make at a societal level.
Mm. Well, Naresh, thank you again. You've given me about 6 things to say here, so I'm going to do my best to try and remember. The first thing I want to respond to is, while you were talking about the really interesting, innovative, creative, imaginal, and realized things that people were doing in the project that you're involved in at the moment. Well, A, I'd love to hear more about that as well. But B, what came to my mind as I was listening to you was, I was thinking, you know what, this is not that dissimilar to the process of psychotherapy that I see people go through all the time. They kind of examine their old life. I'm going to put it very simply, and I apologize, it's a bit crude, but you go into psychotherapy because things aren't quite right. You don't seek psychotherapy because everything's fabulous, really, not usually anyway. So you go because you want to change things, and that process of change that people go through involves letting go of old ways of doing things, old patterns of relationship, old illusions about themselves, old shame, old guilt. You know, there is a process of deepening, a process of letting go. And then at some point in that process, there's often grief and sadness and depression and loss. And I'm always quite keen to sort of support people in also valuing what they're letting go of, because it did a good job for a while. And it wasn't all bad, but you're outgrowing it, or you're wanting something different, some different shape. But that doesn't mean you have to let go of everything that you had before. You can take a lot of the good things with you, or a lot of the really valuable things with you, the things that you cherish. And that can form part of the new. So the old grows out of the new. It's that idea of transformation rather than change. So change would crudely kind of, alter something. And I think people react defensively and with a lot of anxiety around the idea of change, because often there's a suggestion that there's a lot that needs to go. Whereas actually, if you talk about transformation, it's often a way of enabling people to think about, actually, I can transform some of what I've already got and bring some new things in, and other people can contribute to that. And actually, it's exciting and creative and innovative. So I was sort of pulling parallels between what you were saying about what people were doing externally with also what I see people doing internally. And that internal relationship with the external, that they mirror each other. There's a relationship between them. And also, it was also coming to my mind that, you said that gives you hope. And I was thinking, well, actually what gives me hope is often seeing people go through that process of transition and transformation and struggle and transform their lives and transform their relationship with their sadness or their grief or their pain or their depression, and not get rid of something. This is not positivist psychology that says we've got to get rid of these things. It's about shifting relationship with these things. So you're working more cooperatively, more naturally, more instinctually with yourself. So you shift that relationship with yourself, and that in turn shifts relationship with others. So I was thinking, well, actually, that often gives me hope, because I watch people go through that process, been through that process many times myself. Sure, I will be again, if not now. And also, what that has taught me, and what membership of the Climate Psychology Alliance has taught me, is this idea of radical hope. So the Climate Psychology Alliance talks about radical hope, which isn't naive hope, or isn't sort of hope born out of despair or rage. It's that capacity to stand in the fire, that capacity to have that still point in this disrupted, discomforting, uncomfortable, despairing, amazing, creative world. And that there is still extraordinary relationship within that, both between people and between ourselves and communities, and ourselves and ideas, and ourselves and other species and the earth. So I was thinking that gives me hope. One of the things I wanted to pick up on as well, that you said, people often felt sad. They went through a period of grief and sadness. And I think that is crucial in terms of that transformational change. Chris Robertson in the Climate Psychology Alliance says, we don't need to grow up, we need to grow down at the moment. And, you know, what he's talking about here, this is depth psychology. So, you know, what we're talking about here is about the capacity to grow down into those deeper, yes, sometimes more uncomfortable feelings, but not turn our back on them, because actually there is power in those. So I would connect that to what you were talking about in terms of power. So, you know, sometimes people don't want to let go of that hope because they fear that they'll have nothing left. What I often say to people is, actually, there's extraordinary capacity for empowerment and power in grief and in pain and in rage. And actually, that gives you a sort of really rich compost to the work that you'll do. And it's more sustainable, emotional, and internal and external activism in the future. Otherwise, what you're going to do is you're going to go out there and try and change everything and be full of energy and then fail and then give up and then think that you've made a mistake or somebody else has made a mistake. And then maybe you'll get back up and then maybe you'll have another go and then you'll hit a wall and then you'll collapse and get angry again, right? This is the hero's journey that I'm talking about. This is Luke Skywalker. This is Shrek. This is this heroic journey where we want to try and go and win this battle. And all the narrative about COVID is about we're going to win this war. Well, we're in such deep trouble if we try and win the war against the climate and biodiversity crisis, because it's not a war. Or it's certainly not one that can be won through this entirely heroic narrative. We need this idea of this more feminine, that's not necessarily gendered, lunar narrative, which is about cooperation, which is about being with, which is relational. And it's got to go, when you talk about going beyond, one of the phrases we often use in psychotherapy is about going beyond the known and beyond the ego and beyond this egotistical framing of, you know, I can beat this or I can dominate this or I can win this. And it's the ego that struggles with this. And the ego gets to a point, and hopefully, you know, we all reach it sooner or later, I hope, where it realizes that whilst it's really useful to us, it's not, it can't do the work on its own. And that's when we shift to a place of soul and we shift to a place of relationality and wisdom. And one of my favorite ways of kind of trying to sort of make this simplified, but not in a crude way, is to think about the wisdom of our dependency on the natural world. So, for example, seagrass. I'm slightly obsessed with seagrass because did you know that seagrass absorbs more CO2 from the atmosphere than the rainforest? Now, you know, of course we need to save the rainforest, of course we need to save trees, of course we want to relate to trees, of course. Don't for one second think I'm saying otherwise. I know you wouldn't. But what I'm also fascinated by is this little greeny brown stuff that grows underwater and grows on the seabed that we dredge without thinking it's important. We don't care about it. It's not amazing, you know, but actually it's a natural solution to absorption of CO2 from the atmosphere. So for me, it's about having the wisdom to not just save the trees, fabulous big things, but also having the wisdom for saving the seagrass, which is this small stuff that has been quietly working away as part of biodiversity and is absolutely crucial in terms of us living this life in harmony with our environment, but listening to the wisdom of the grass, listening to the wisdom of the planet, and to stop treating the planet as a disposable object that we can continue to try and defeat, that we can continue to try and control, that we can continue to try and have power over. So I'm coming back to this argument, this point you made about power, because that's partly It's not the only answer, but that's partly what's got us into this mess in the first place, is that absolute disharmony and loss of wisdom. So for me, I'd be bringing in wisdom, that hope has to, have wisdom. It has to have compassion. It has to have capacity to understand that we can fail, that we are humans, that we are mortal, critters running around who are making terrible mistakes, and to have the wisdom and the humility to say, yeah, we've got some things really badly wrong here. So how can we adjust? What can we do differently? Back to you.
Lovely. Yeah, lovely. Just the things that are kind of whizzing around in my world right now are this sense of some of the things you said about letting go and valuing what we let go of, and this process of letting go. And as you said that, one thing that occurred to me was the that it's I think it's no it's not a coincidence that our colonial past and the whole question of how we hold that and how we value it and how we then move beyond it it's not a coincidence that's coming up at this point in time. And it's going to take more, than chucking statues into harbors. It's going to take a lot of deep, hard work, I think. But that feels like that's an important shift that's happening at this moment in time. And also, there's something there about, as you were talking about transformation, and I'm curious about, which I'm really curious about, which is resistance. And I think, Claire started off this conversation asking us about the narrative. What's the, why is this narrative that is pushing back against things like collapse, against deep adaptation, against XR? Why is that surfacing now? And I think it's surfacing because, like we said at the beginning, it's these ideas are gaining traction. They're starting to become powerful. And there's a lot of people who don't really want that conversation to happen because they're afraid of it, because they're afraid of losing position, because they're afraid of losing what they have. And I'm just curious about the kind of, as a psychologist, what you see in resistance and how we resist those changes that we are that are confronting us, because like you say, the old patterns, the old ways of doing things don't work very well anymore, and we need to move beyond that. And we're seeing that, I think, absolutely paralleled in our culture, in our systems, in our economic system. We are seeing that this whole idea of growth on a finite planet, infinite growth on a finite planet, and some of the other ideas that are prevalent in mainstream economics are being questioned, and they need to be questioned, because maybe they served us when human presence on the earth was very small, but they don't serve us now when there's 7.5, 8, going on 8 billion people, all wanting to live the sorts of lifestyles that those of us in the middle class in the West are living. So we are questioning that, and then I'm curious about how to work. I don't have any answers particularly, but how do you work with that resistance other than hold it and let it be there? And don't, there's this, I guess, also the sense of in psychotherapy is that you're not, like you say, you're not wanting to change anything. You're just wanting to be with it. And then, how does something like, say, XR be with that level of social resilience? And holding all these tensions that go with it, that we don't have much time. We really need to make these changes. But nonetheless, that process of resistance is, I think, part and parcel of the social change that we're seeing now. And then that, I think, segues into this sense of, well, yeah, we are walking into the unknown, and that is where we are now, and And of course, there's going to be a lot of people who are really, really going to resist that and really don't want to hear that message. But I think for the sake of our children and our grandchildren, for the sake of ourselves and our society, that is something we need to take on board. We are, the resistance and the sense of going beyond the known ways of working, the known ways of being. I think there's also something very powerful in here about sort of masculine and feminine, again, non-gendered, but the sense of, that sense of soft power that comes with the more feminine ways of working. And this sense of letting go of the kind of control that comes with a more masculine way of working is, I think, all those things feel like they're important pieces in the puzzle that we're attempting to put together and attempt to weave as a species. So yeah.
Yeah. When you said you noticed resistance, was that did you think of resistance in others, or was that a resistance in yourself?
Well, I certainly I would be a complete liar if I didn't say I didn't have resistance in myself. Of course I do. I feel that all the time. There's this sense of, I just shut up and go away and leave me alone and let me get on with this. But also there's a kind of, being caught in that place of realizing, well, actually, this doesn't really work anymore. So what do I do, and how do I hold that and move forward? So yeah, I'm seeing both in myself, but I'm also seeing those wider patterns of resistance. And just for instance, I think the way in which the British police, the Metropolitan Police and the establishment held the April Rebellion as opposed to the October Rebellion couldn't have been more different. And I sensed that there was somewhere a decision was made for the police to be much more proactive and to come down on the October Rebellion and not allow that sense of carnival and that sort of sense of emergence of these new ways of being to be on display on the streets of London the way they were in April. So I see that, and at the same time, the obvious things that obviously the fossil fuel industry is trying to hold on, doing its best to hold on. The extractive industries are doing their best to slow down the pace of change. Even though they know they're on the wrong side of history, that they still are, for the sake of profits and for the sake of their shareholders, that's of course what they're going to do. And it's very hard to see where the no is going to come from. Who's going to tell them no, and who's going to force that change upon them. And at the same time, we see. Even companies like BP they started that move to beyond petroleum about 10 years ago and then quickly backtracked, and now I think they're re-embracing that. So and again, I would love to have been in BP board meetings over the last 10 years to hear those different voices and the different dialogues and the different financial calculations that were going on as to who was winning and who was putting forth what proposals. But nonetheless, this is where we are. We're in a period of enormous change, and of course there's going to be enormous resistance that goes with it.
Yeah, and some of that resistance is fear, as you said, of not knowing what's coming. So you're quite right. This is about encountering the unknown. And it's about also not being able to imagine the alternatives. So I think that's one of the difficulties, is that we actually have a lot of technological alternatives. We have a lot of alternatives which we could support and start moving towards a lot more rapidly. But we want to be certain. We want to be guaranteed that things will be okay. And we can't promise people that, can we?
Mm.
So I think some of the resistance comes from holding on to the old, even though we know the old is no longer serving us well, because we can't really see what that future alternative would look like. And there's no map to get from A to B, right? We don't know how to get across this territory because there's no map, no blueprint. Psychologically, we have never encountered a time like this before in our lives. People sometimes try and draw parallels with things like the Cuban Missiles Crisis or natural disasters, but there is no parallel to be drawn with those, because again, you could imagine those a point in time where we would be beyond those. You can imagine a point at which a war will end, or a crisis will end, or a disaster will end. So you can imagine that future and work towards creating that future. The climate and biodiversity crisis is an existential threat as well as a real practical threat, because it's never going to end. We've reached the point now, haven't we? I think you probably know this full well, as do I, that we can never go back to what we had before. We've already lost millions and millions of animals, billions of animals. Hundreds and thousands of people have already died. Even if we went to zero carbon emissions tomorrow, it's probably too late for a lot of the low-lying Pacific nations, Vanuatu, Bangladesh, the Maldives, parts of Africa, some of the coastal cities. Because of the melting ice that's going on at the moment, they're likely to be underwater, even if we went to zero carbon emissions tomorrow. So we have to, how do we cope with that, right? We've caused this. We've done this. So one of the ways we have to engage with that is to take responsibility and recognize that we are culpable in this. Now, we have to also be careful about that relationship between culpability and guilt and shame, because I work a lot with young people and children and youth climate strikers, and I rarely talk with groups of children and young people without prefacing that talk with, I'm really sorry, right? I'm really sorry. I look out, and I look at them and I think, the first thing I've got to do is say sorry. We've done this. You did not contribute to this economy. Your carbon footprint, your carbon emissions are very small. You're 12 years old. So we as adults really, and we in particular as adults in Western industrialized capitalist society, need to say sorry. And in that, there's something very liberating in saying sorry, both for us, in recognizing that culpability, and in also being able to stand there and take responsibility, because at that point, you then can act differently, because you've accepted what it is you've done. Whilst we're still in denial about the fact that we've caused this, we're never going to take responsibility. We're going to carry on kind of going, oh, it's not that bad really. And, oh, well, what else could we do? And, oh, well, economic growth is good. And we're going to carry on perpetuating those mythologies in order to allow us to carry on for just that little bit longer. And part of the reason we're avoiding that is because we just don't want to face up to feeling bad about what we've done, because some of what we've done was really dumb, right? And we could have woken up to this decades ago. This is one of the problems we've got, right? So I say sorry, and the young people, initially they can sometimes go, oh, no, well, you haven't done this. They want to keep me as a good person. And I say, no, actually, no, let me say sorry. And let me show you what it looks like to have an adult say sorry, not collapse into despair, and I'm this terrible person, and make me feel better, and not defend, but stand in that, yeah, we've messed up. Now, and then I say, and now what can we do together now how can we work together? Now how can we build alternative futures together? And a lot of them come up to me afterwards and say, it's such a relief. because they also needed to see an adult not tell them to go away and stop worrying about it and go back to school, or tell them that they shouldn't be feeling the way they're feeling. They needed to see us model that. So, if I was to kind of extend that collectively, socially, globally, I'm glad you brought in this point about, Black Lives Matter and the breakdown of the kind of colonial thinking. We also need to be saying sorry there. So this is about reparation. And actually reparation is enormously powerful. And it is both empowering to the people who say sorry and the people who are being said sorry to. It helps both, and it heals and builds relational bridges between us. Without us kind of collapsing into guilt, toxic guilt, and going, oh, I'm this terrible person, or shame. And it's trying to avoid that guilt that means that people go into denial and say, oh, well, it's our history and we can't rewrite history. Well, yeah, we can still say sorry for the fact that that history was fairly lousy. I was interested when you talked about soft power, because what it provoked in me, of course, was an immediate watch out for the fierce feminine, right? So, don't make the mistake, and I know you wouldn't, Naresh, but, the feminine is not all sweet and nice, right? So it immediately evoked this kind of fierce tigress kind of moment where I was thinking, yeah, but maybe the feminine's also got the fierceness that's needed here, that fierce compassion, that fierce willingness to do things even though it hurts, right? So that had to throw that one in. I also want to sort of talk about this fear of change. Yeah, absolutely, people are frightened of change, but if I was going to be really, really honest, I would just say, yeah, and because just because we're scared of it, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing it. So, because actually, but this is back to wisdom, change is necessary right now. So, of course, people are frightened and of course, people are uncertain. What we do need to do is help people build the emotional intelligence, emotional resilience to learn how to navigate that change. So we're not abandoning them into despair and panic and distress, which is where people get reactive and then go, oh no, well, we can't do this. Right? So yes, corporations are frightened of this change as much as people are. And we need to sort of be saying at the same time, this change is inevitable. How can we help you achieve this change? We'll walk alongside you, and we're going to do it anyway. So we can do it now, or we can wait till it's almost too late and it's really horrific. And it's pretty horrific now, but it's only going to get worse. So we have to face up to that worsening. Right? Can I read you something, and then I'm going to shut up and hand back to you. Can I just read you one of my favourite passages? We live in perilous times. The peril is of our own making, and many of us probably deserve it. But the children and the native peoples of this world, and most important, all the other species sashaying around in this great dance of life, don't deserve the peril we have created. The ecologist Raymond Dasman says that World War III has already begun, and it's the war of industrial humans against the earth. He's correct. All of us are warriors on one side or another in this war. There are no sidelines, there are no civilians. Ours is the last generation that will have the choice of wilderness, clean air, abundant wildlife, and expansive forests. The crisis is that severe. What's important is you act, you do something now. Now the kicker question is, what year was that written? Right?
Yeah.
So, I asked this in a workshop yesterday. I asked this in every workshop I do. And people are smart enough now to recognize that this was written in the 1960s. But it sounds like the narrative of the youth climate strikers. It sounds like Greta Thunberg. It sounds like Extinction Rebellion. It's a current narrative. But this narrative has been around since the 1960s. This was specifically published in 1991. It's David Foreman, Confessions of an Eco-Warrior. That's what eco-warriors used to look like.
Mm.
Yeah. What concerns me is it's been around for decades. But his language, his narrative, I think is incredibly powerful when he talks about us being the last generation that will have clean air and abundant forests. Because we're probably past that point now for the majority. And the horror of that, and the shame of that, and the guilt of that, and the grief of that, and the absurdity of that needs to be faced.
Yeah. Just some random thoughts. I don't even know if I have any coherent thoughts left. It's been a brilliant conversation, and I've really enjoyed it. This back and forth. I'm curious, Claire. Is there anything you want to put in now, or is it? Huh? No, Claire. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I have some notes. And thank you. It's really been a bit of a treat just to sit and listen. I guess the first thing that came into my mind when you guys was talking was that we had a very early piece of messaging, which I cannot remember precisely where it came from, but myself and my friend Miles found it somewhere, which was hope dies, action begins. And it was entirely with that spirit from where I started to work on Extinction Rebellion. And as we built up the kind of some of the messaging and the art team at the beginning, and it's definitely something that's been, it hasn't disappeared, but it's not as strong as it was in the earlier stages. And I think the liberation of the letting go, and as you were talking, also thinking about my own experience of life and knowing that I've been through quite a lot of traumatic stuff, and I've had a lot of psychotherapy actually. And what would I wish upon the movement if I could sort of tell everybody there was something that they should do? I've always thought it would be to just ask people to try and make it a sort of mandatory that they pay some attention to their own emotional well-being in that way, and be dedicated to their own personal sort of development, because I don't think, if I hadn't been so traumatized as a young person, and then found a fantastic therapist who has helped me amazingly for like 10 years I think now, then I don't think I would be the person that I am now, dealing with this the way that I am now. And so I've had a lot of personal responses to the things that you've been saying, and also thinking about humility. And that was another thing that came through from the art team. We made artwork which had words humility and empathy and compassion and solidarity, and frugality is a word which has never had quite as much love as the others. But actually it's a joy, isn't it, to like have less when you're living in this throes of this kind of dramatic excess, which you also know is destroying everything that you love. And then I guess the other thing that strikes me about what you've been talking about, which I'm really interested in, is how power and humility can coexist. Because at the moment I feel that within our space that we're in, there's often a sense that people are very afraid of power, and I think people are very afraid of stepping into their own power, right? As well as we're sort of looking at the power systems that we want to affect, and people are feeling that if power equates to control, but what if power is actually can equate to other things, and how can it relate to things that seem dichotomous, like power and humility. I guess in terms of that being an opportunity for some kind of new, expansive, imaginative kind of place that we could go to. So yeah, there's some of the things that have been on my mind. I don't know if you want to make any response to those, but
I mean, power. I'll pick up on the power thing first. Power is not a problem in itself. Absolutely, you're absolutely right, Claire. We have a responsibility, particularly those of us with the privilege and the capacity to act on these things. We have a responsibility, actually, to wield that power for good, for the greater good, for the majority. And, you know, the children that I speak with in Bangladesh and the Maldives and Nigeria and India and Vanuatu, they don't have much power. They don't have much real power. The children I speak with here in the UK about this, I've been talking to children about how they feel about this for 5 years. And they genuinely don't have power. But they have the power to tell me how they feel, and then I have the capacity to tell you. We have to wield power for good on behalf of others and alongside others, but not in a patronizing way, not in a disempowering way, but in a, this is our duty, it's our responsibility. What else would we be doing right now? Because so many people are genuinely powerless. So those of us who have the power of speaking out, I feel like it's my responsibility to use that well, and not use it over people, but use it to empower others. So, yeah, and that is humility, isn't it? And that's about embodying that, and not thinking that this is what I think, but this is, we've got to do it because I think I'm right. That's where the power gets distorted into a misuse of power. But it's about having the power of wisdom and the power of, recognizing that, we've all achieved this understanding through failure, through struggle, through falling apart. Me too, Claire, right? So, lost track of the number of times I've, struggled with stuff and felt overwhelmed and thought trauma and despair and grief and I don't know what I'm doing, of course. But it's that shaped me, and that's enabled me to develop the capacity to be with others who are in that space. And that brings us closer. And if we could collectively do that, collectively and globally, it would change something. So this is the power that I think we hold as white people to do something, to make reparation, to use it well. Because it's actually perverse to try and give your power away. That doesn't empower other people at all. It's actually kind of slightly arrogant. I'm not surprised that this idea of frugality triggers people and makes them really uneasy. Absolutely. But what also came to mind is this kind of less is more. And actually, losing some of that external stuff, if you've got more sense of self, more self-worth, more sense of community, more sense of belonging, more sense of, being with other people in these kind of creative, empowering, inspiring endeavors, nothing could be better than that. So, yeah. Maybe it's, Judith Anderson in Climate Psychology Alliance talks about needs versus wants. And that's nicer language, maybe, of a similar thing. She says we should stop thinking so much about what we want, but focus on what we need. And I think maybe that's a kind of man, maybe as, I don't know, I don't want to put words in her mouth, she's not here. But there's this kind of spiritual frugality and a soulful frugality about appreciating the value of what we've still got and actually appreciating what we've still got instead of lusting and longing for things that we haven't got.
Yeah, I was part of a conversation as part of another group, and some of the voices in that conversation come from very diverse parts of the world, and I just wanted to echo what you were saying, Caroline, about our I don't know. It's hard to use find the word, exactly what the word for it is. Is it a duty, or is it an imperative, or is it something? I don't know. To use the power that we have, and the conversation went along the lines of, there was some of us who were part of XR who were out on the streets and protesting and doing that sort of work, and then some of the people in the conversation were from Singapore, were from India, and we're from Hong Kong. And those are three places, like the chap from India said, well, if you're kind of protesting against the government here in India, it's quite likely you would disappear for quite some time and might never be heard from again. And, it's just to be, to value, this is, again, to echo that, show me what democracy looks like. Well, this is what democracy looks like: the ability to be out and expressing our desire for change, expressing our power, using the power that we have to stand for what we believe in and what we feel is right. Because there's many parts of the world where people cannot do that. Singapore is virtually a police state, and so is Hong Kong now. So if it's not us, who can do this?
Quite.
Thank you so much. You both sort of brought it to an ideal close, I think, just right there. So I don't think I need to say any more. I'll just thank you both very much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure, and it's nice to have brought you in a bit more as well, Claire. It's lovely talking with you, Naresh, but it's also great to get you in as well, Claire.
Yeah. No, I've been very aware of this kind of, there's two older people rabbiting away, and there's very quiet in the corner, and thinking, what's going on there? But and that perfectly illustrates some of what we were talking about. But anyway, that's how we set it up. So yeah, thank you. And it has been a pleasure. It's been brilliant to speak, and thank you.
Thanks so much, and maybe I'll see you on the streets.
Yeah.
Sometime soon.
Yes. Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.